Mm-hmm.
All righty. All right. First on deck, let's talk about this A&M coaching staff. So, of course, in the offseason, Texas A&M has a head coaching job open. They go and they get Mike Elko. And Mike Elko, he's built out a coaching staff, and I think a lot of fans are happy about that, about the staff so far. Can you confirm this, Drew?
I can definitely confirm this, man. If you want me to get right into it, it kind of hit me out of left field when Jimbo was fired. And I know we had kind of a rough couple of years, but even down to the day it happened, it was pretty crazy to me. I mean, even when I just think back to like a couple months ago, we're just like square in the Jimbo era, if you will. And then all of a sudden it's done and we have a whole new coaching staff at the helm. It's still kind of hard to wrap my mind around, especially for me, considering I've only been doing this since Jimbo's been the coach. So I've exclusively been talking Jimbo Fisher's A&M for a couple of years now. But the way this staff has come together over the last couple of months, it's been remarkable, man. I think it exceeded expectations.
All right, awesome. So let's start here then. Let's talk about some of the highlights of this coaching staff. Let me ask you to walk us through some of those highlights and what they really mean to Texas A&M and maybe why this fits really well.
Okay, so you think back a couple years of struggling that A&M has had, and I think of a couple of things that I think were addressed within this coaching staff. So I feel like A&M always came up short in close games over the last couple of years. I think Jimbo won some close games earlier in his tenure, obviously in 2020, but over the last couple of years, it just felt like A&M lacked some toughness or a little bit of grit at the end of games. It felt like
Especially
A&M
on
made the big mistakes.
especially on the road.
Oh
Especially on
yeah.
the road.
Oh man. Don't even get me started about that road drought. It's been rough. I think was the last road win the Missouri game in 2020. I think that's the last road win for Texas
Yeah, I think the
A&M.
last ranked road win was like 2016 or 2014 against Ole Miss or something like that. It's
Yeah. Yeah,
it
man.
goes all the way back to like Kevin Sumlin or something like that. It's absurd.
Yeah, exactly, man. It's been rough. So I think a lot of that goes to mindset and toughness and kind of the intangible stuff because you think about A&M, the talent's there. They've been recruiting at the highest level. Even through the Sumlin era, A&M recruited well, but besides a couple Johnny years, not much to show for it. So I guess I'll start with the tip of the iceberg, the moves, the coaching or acquisitions that in my opinion move the needle the most. And that starts with Tommy Moffitt. I think you get a great strength and conditioning program. That's kind of besides recruiting, if you will, the lifeblood of your program is going to be strength and conditioning. First of all, because that guy is around your players year round. I mean, they're training year round. If you look at A&M social media right now, we're getting clips of Tommy Moffitt interacting with the players right now. So that's a very important piece. And what's so great about Tommy, I mean, you look at some great coaches. I'm from San Antonio, so we have the Spurs. Greg Popovich has a huge coaching lineage throughout the NBA. And that's kind of a testament to his greatness. If you look at Tommy Moffitt, I don't know if you've heard of the Moffitt method. That's kind of his methodology, his program, his whole structure of strength and conditioning. Dozens of college programs utilize his system. So for me, that's like an instant that raises my eyebrows right away. I admittedly didn't know too much about him besides that he was at LSU for years. But if you have a guy who's so successful that other programs are picking up what this guy does, and outside of that alone, his tree of assistants have spread out throughout football as well. I am very, very excited to see what kind of a difference a guy like Tommy Moffitt can make in this program, just interacting with the guys and building his program, his strength and conditioning program here. So I think the O-line specifically benefits from that. This has been an injury-riddled team for a couple years. I don't know if this fixes that, but it certainly can't hurt. What do you guys think about Tommy Moffitt? I think that is at the top of my list. I'm really excited about the coordinators. We'll talk about them in a second, but I just think this is something that permeates every position group.
Well, I think CD, I'll let you talk about this because you're a Big Ten West guy, so you can attest to the value of a strength and conditioning program, especially there in the Big Ten West.
Oh yeah, absolutely. You're looking at Michigan right now, and Ben Herbert, right? We see everyone's like, how often do you see a strength and conditioning coach like actually be brought up to the forefront of conversations? But I think that's being happened more often, and rightfully so. I think people are more getting an insight of what happens actually in the day-to-day operations, more so in the off season, and who actually gets to interact with these players, like you mentioned. more so than ever. So yeah, this is massive. And you mentioned a change needed to happen, whether it was a mentality, a physicality, development with your bodies. You've seen guys like Bryce Foster, who's maybe regressed since he's been a freshman at the O line. You mentioned that getting better, which definitely needs to be happening. So yeah, I love this here. I think it's credit to Mike Elko for being able to find a guy like him and convince him to come on staff, because why wouldn't you with the resources you guys know down there in College Station? It's just like everything else there. And yeah, I think this is, again, I love that you brought this up first, because this is super important.
That's a good point. I mean, credit to Elko, because you know what Moffitt was doing? He was retired. I mean, it seemed like he was, right? He had years under his belt. He was at home. I mean, he was still working. He had his program and he was teaching that. But I mean, yeah, major credit to Elko for getting him.
Absolutely. And I like you ever see you see the picture of Tommy Moffitt where it was like, attention NFL scouts, these players, should not be drafted because they have, neglected their workout duties or the responsibility to their team working out. And like on that list was crazy because like Lale Collins, there's a couple other ones that are like names that you would know in the NFL. But I like that accountability, especially since like, it's starting to come out more and more that, the locker room culture these last couple years may not there might have been less accountability, and when there was accountability, it was too late, right? So I think adding some extra accountability in that program, it can only do good. I mean, these are college kids. I mean, CD and I are college kids. I mean, there's a lot of responsibility to be learned, in those years of growth. So I like that a lot. Any other? I know you said you had a couple other highlights. Give me some other highlights, Drew.
Yeah. Real quick, you made an interesting point there. Maybe some accountability issues, maybe some more mentality stuff. I think there was an interview or a press conference with Jimbo earlier this season, maybe coming right out of camp, where he kind of mentioned in passing that players needed to learn how to play through these nicks and knacks. I think, I don't know if you remember this, but he definitely highlighted this in one of the early pressers. And to me, that's a lack of toughness. I mean, it's football. You're going to play through nicks and knacks. You're going to have to. And apparently players weren't practicing through some of that stuff in camp. So I think Moffitt really fixes that. And Chris, I think you mentioned the O-line and Bryce Foster maybe regressing a little bit. Well, we can go ahead and talk about Adam Cushing, because I do think Adam Cushing, who is the O-line coach now at A&M, Tommy Moffitt, and Colin Klein are all going to work hand in hand to make this O-line better. First of all, Colin Klein's scheme, but Adam Cushing is a major contrast, in my opinion, to what Steve Addazio was before. I think Addazio is more of like your hardcore, old school, I don't know how to describe it, but like kind of just like the old school vibe, a yeller, just very much an intensity kind of a guy.
It's very blue collar.
Very blue collar. That's the right way to say it. And I'm not saying Adam Cushing's not that, but when I hear Adam Cushing talk, and if you guys look on YouTube, there are some like coaching clinics that he's done that I've listened to that get me excited. He's very direct and down to earth and tactical with his approach. And that to me is hand in hand with what Elko is like. Elko's very organized. He's very, I guess, tactical. Is intelligent the right word? I don't know, but it just seems more in line with what Elko wants to do. And I think you need to zig where the O-line has been zagging, because the O-line has been bad for a couple of years. And like y'all said, like we've been saying, there's been regression amongst players like Foster and Fothery. I don't know about you guys. I thought Layden Robinson didn't take off the way he could have this year. I feel that's the way the whole O-line has been over the last couple of years, just not progressing as we had hoped. And I really like the contrast going from Addazio to Cushing. And I mean, Cushing's been an O-line coach for a long time. I mean, where's he been? He was at Duke before. I forget where he was before that. He was at Northwestern, right, for 15 years or something like that as the O-line coach.
Yep.
He only gave up 15 sacks last year, and that was their down year of the two Elko years, I think. I'm really excited about Cushing in this O-line, and also Colin Klein, just a new style, more innovative, more willing to get playmakers involved, and a little bit more creative with the O-line, X's and O's and that kind of thing. If you go look at some of his film, it's some interesting stuff. I don't know if you guys have done a deep dive on Colin Klein yet. I've started to dabble. You're going to see some different looks by this O-line this year, and I think that could help these guys out quite a bit. How do you feel about these two guys?
I love him. I love it. I mean, it's going to be, like you said, like you see these clips, especially in the run game, and we've had, I think, really good running backs and veteran offensive line in some years that have kind of hidden some of the problems that run game had, like the lack of creativity. there is no lack of creativity with Colin Klein
Innovator,
in
man.
his
Yeah.
innovator. Like he has guards moving all the place. You're gonna see kind of a different kind of offensive lineman being recruited. I think you're gonna start seeing, faster linemen being recruited, like guys that can get to the second level,
Yeah.
which is fine. That might take a couple years to get those guys in. I think you saw, I mean, Dorian Hinton. We'll get into transfer portal guys later. I mean, he's a little bit smaller, but definitely a quick guy. Like I like what they're. I like what they got. I like what they got. I mean, CD, what are your thoughts on Colin Klein here? I know you love the hire almost more than I did.
Yeah, I thought it was super super impressive. What he did with some, I guess I wouldn't say limited talent at Kansas State because there were some nice players there, but I definitely think he maximized a lot of what he had there. He was a very, I would call it, just innovative quarterback in general when he played back at Kansas State there. Did a lot of fun things. Him and Coach Snyder there. But yeah, I think it's fantastic. Seen some of his clips, like you said, on Twitter, the fun things he does, and just the total motion and different misdirection that you feel like you've been missing from a Jimbo Fisher offense. You got a little bit this year. I was impressed with Bobby Petrino offensively. I wouldn't have hated if he stayed on, but obviously I understand that there was probably a change needed with Mike Elko bringing in his own guys he wanted and his own direction and culture. But in terms of pure scheme and culture, and I think Colin Klein can be a damn good recruiter too. I think his ability to connect with this generation, and whatnot, and obviously sell the Aggie program and everything that comes with it. Plus, getting some talent in that room right there. Obviously, Connor Wigman is a guy I know me and Matthew are super high, and I'd love to hear your thoughts, Andrew, on him if we get there. But yeah, I think he can do some special things, and I know Kansas State was pissed when they let him go or had to let him go.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that, and I do feel under Jimbo that as great as of players that we did see at times. I mean, Anais Smith, A-Chain, Isaiah Spiller, some of these guys were great, but I never felt like any offensive player reached their potential in college. Even A-Chain, I feel like wasn't utilized to the fullest. They used him between the tackles a lot, but you look at how Miami uses him now, getting him in space, he's a lethal weapon. I just think that, and you think about more recently, Moose Muhammad, we didn't see him till the end of the year, and every time he touches the ball, something amazing happens. So I
Tell me
am
about
more
it.
confident. Yeah, I know you know, Matt. I know you know. But I'm just way more confident in guys that need the ball to get the ball as well under Klein. Because I think he's mentioned it. I mean, even Petrino mentioned it. We saw it to an extent, but I just made a complaint about last year where Moose Muhammad didn't get the ball. Feed the studs. That should absolutely be the mantra when you have the talent that A&M does offensively. With Jimbo, I felt like it was always trying to he tried so hard to stick to his scheme. He tried so hard to remain unpredictable that at times I feel like players weren't showcased or utilized to the best of their ability. I'm really excited about that to change here.
I agree. I mean, you look at and I talked about the run game earlier. I mean, A&M was 90th in the country in rushing yards per game, 88th in rushing yards per attempt. And we only ran the ball 49% of the time, which was in the much lower half. And some of that had to do with, being down in games, but
Yeah,
just
sure.
not a very effective run game this past year. And I am excited to see that change. Any other coaches that you really like that Mike Elko's brought on?
Yeah, I'll quickly go through a couple. I mean, Coach Ish, great recruiter, obviously a huge pedigree. Going back to like that 2022 class, he was instrumental in a lot of those early on. I mean, even right now, look at the DB haul we just got in the portal. I mean, Ish is involved with all of that, and we just signed Petaway, I think his name is, in the 2025 class. That was an Ish as the primary recruiter. I mean, he hit the ground running here at A&M. He's back, and I mean, all reports about what he has been behind the scenes have always been glowing, even back to his time as an assistant and all that. And he's just a great addition to the secondary. And much like I said that Adam Cushing is zigging where the O-line was zagging before, you need a change in the secondary because I think corner straight up lost us 2 games this last year. You look at the Bama game, corners just getting destroyed consistently over and over again. Jalen Miller looking like a Heisman passer versus A&M. You look at Ole Miss, Trey Harris, I think he did his best impersonation of insert Hall of Fame NFL receiver. I mean, he was amazing versus us. So, you look at the portal, kind of previewing ahead to what we're going to talk about. You had to get some new corners in, and you had to get some new blood in that corner coaching staff. And I think Ish is a great addition there. It was going to be Wesley McGriff next to him. He went back to Auburn after taking the job here. Now it's Jordan Peterson, former Aggie. I mean, I think he's had what 4 all Big 12 guys in his few years at Kansas. Yeah, at Kansas, and he was the highest rated recruiter in the Big 12 that wasn't from Texas or OU last year. So I mean, you get another recruiter, another guy that can coach. I mean, you needed change, you got change, and this is some of the best you could have gotten, I think, if you're Mike Elko. So I'm feeling good about that, going hand in hand with all the defensive back additions that you got in the portal that we'll talk about in a minute. Obviously, Holman Wiggins is a huge name to get. I mean, did he coach Devontae Smith, right? Did he coach him?
Briefly overlap,
Briefly,
yeah.
Yeah, brief overlap. You know, I think he gets a bad rep from Bama, but I just think that you needed a change in the wide receiver room as well. We weren't seeing great development there, and I'm excited to get a guy from the Saban coaching tree. That's always huge. We'll see how it works out. I was excited by the name. I just want to see some productivity there. I want to see some development over time, and he has some great tools to work with. So we'll have a good early glimpse of what Wiggins does. But I just think overall he got a bunch of really good recruiters on the staff. I think that's a common thread amongst all these guys. Trooper Taylor comes to mind as well. I mean, some dudes that have just gotten players at the highest level. Do y'all have any other highlights besides the guys that I brought up, or any thoughts on those guys?
Well, yeah, I do want to bring up Jordan Peterson real quick. I think that is such like an untalked about hire. It was talked about in A&M communities pretty well, but if you go, like one thing that a lot of people say, right, is like look at what your rivals or look at what the other team does. Like, what is their reaction when they lose a guy to you, right?
Yeah.
The reaction from Kansas fans when they lost Jordan Peterson was like a nuclear bomb went off, right? It was
Really?
almost as
That's
bad.
awesome.
It was almost as bad as like, when their OC left to go to Penn State, right? Obviously, that's killer, but you still got Lance Leipold there, so you're like, all right, there's some continuity in that offense.
Right.
It's gonna be good. At least we have Jordan Peterson recruit that defensive side of the ball because you also look like Kansas and their defense. Yeah, sure, like they didn't have a great pass rush, they didn't have a great run defense. But the common denominator is that they were like top 15 in interceptions the last 2 years with Lance Leipold. And creating those turnovers and having really good DBs changed games. It won them the Oklahoma game. It won them the Texas game. Uh, was that last or 2 years ago? They beat Texas 2 years. Oh, that might have 3 years ago. Either way,
Yeah.
that is how Kansas has won some games, some big time turnovers, big time plays by that secondary. So I love the Jordan Peterson hire. See, I want to hear you talk about Holman Wiggins because I know you're pretty familiar with him.
Yeah, so obviously, like you mentioned, everything that you said stands. You mentioned he did overlap with Devonta Smith, and obviously didn't help develop him, but that year he had him. He was obviously a Heisman Trophy winner.
Yep.
Obviously everything that happened in that offense was built through Smith and Waddle while they were healthy. A lot of other playmakers they had. He also helped develop and recruit Jameson Williams, obviously in the transfer portal from Ohio State, but he really unlocked his full potential there. Yeah, you mentioned he does have a bad rep from Bama folks. I don't think it comes from his recruiting at all. Some of their development has not been great, but I don't think that blame it on him. They whiffed on some guys. They've also this year, I think you would have seen guys like Isaiah Bond, guys like Malik Benson really take that step forward with an elite passing game. And this year, it wasn't really focused on that. It was kind of getting back to the old Saban roots about running the ball, playing good defense, and taking care of the football and taking deep shots when they had with Milroe's arm. I think this is a pretty splash hire. I don't think I really like it. Recruiting wise, obviously he's getting in with the early Katy guy for 2025. I forget his name, but he's a guy that this old staff apparently neglected. And obviously Holman Wiggins' first thing he did when he got there was really contact him as an in-state 5-star receiver. So yeah, I think good things happen there. And again, it's another like impressive name for Mike Elko to leave a pretty quality place or wherever he was very happy and whether you had to pay him or whether you had to convince him, I think a little bit of both. But regardless, though, you got to have respect for Elko and the staff he's building.
Yeah, and one more thing on Wiggins. I mentioned this to my audience when it first happened. Just the perception factor alone of getting a guy like that is huge. But he's also, there's like the cherry on top. He was the primary offensive recruiter for Terry Bussey when he was at Bama. So he had that contact already, and that's obviously a battle that's still going on. So that's just a little bonus right there. So yeah, a lot of benefits to him. I think he still needs to be proven. I think that's safe to say, but I think it looks good. It feels like a good pickup right now.
Yeah, Holman Wiggins, Nick Scorden, who's Terry Bussey's cousin. There's
That's
a large
right.
effort in College Station to, I think, get Terry Bussey. So
Yes.
the last thing I want to bring up, Drew, while we have you here talking about coaches, So Sean Spencer is a new defensive line coach at Texas A&M, right? You lose Elijah Robinson, who a lot of people would say was kind of the lifeblood of A&M recruiting in the last, I mean, however many years he was there.
Mm-hmm.
Describe to me or quantify as best you can what that loss is and like how we have maybe compensated for that.
Well, I think the loss in the transfer portal kind of speaks for itself. You lose a bunch of D linemen. You didn't think, well, I didn't think we would lose Fadil Diggs. I think if we lost him, it would have been going pro. I think that was a major surprise. LT Overton, I mean, I don't know if he was the most productive here. He was a consistent contributor, but losing him probably wouldn't have happened if you didn't lose E-Rob. It was a little bit surprising. Walter Nolan, kind of knowing him and knowing his mentality, it doesn't surprise me as much to lose him, but losing E-Rob basically guaranteed it. So you see that right away. I mean, you see that that's E-Rob right there, most likely affecting those decisions. It's hard for me to say that he's irreplaceable because anybody can be replaced in this world. Yes, he had relationships that were formed. That's just part of losing a coach. Or firing a coach. That's just part of coaching turnover. That's part of the game. So I think Sean Spencer is as good of a veteran or a name that's known, a guy that's probably had communication with a lot of players that we would be recruiting anyway. He's in this footprint. He has pedigree. He's been around a long time. I really like getting Sean Spencer in here. He's already getting involved with recruiting. He's active on Twitter. You love to see him tweeting out every time we get a commit. Feels good. I think he's a very worthy replacement for E-Rob, but E-Rob did hold a special place in all of our hearts. He held it down. He held it down after Terry Price passed away. Just, he'll always be an Aggie in my eyes, even though the end, there was some, I guess, drama. I don't know, with him getting some guys to go to Syracuse. Whatever. E-Rob's a legend. We're moving on. I feel like they did fine replacing with Sean Spencer and others. This whole staff is full of great recruiters, great relationship guys. So, and then Tony Girardetti is another great recruiter who had great relationships with those guys too. So you don't lose everything with E-Rob, but you lose some.
I would like to
Definitely.
ask a question too about just the staff in general. Like you keep bringing up recruiting, which I do love, and we do know that is the lifeline of college football. Even with transfer portal, I think high school recruiting still has to be the focus if you're a program that can recruit at the capability that A&M has. But in terms of recruiting that leads to production, obviously the last staff and Jimbo Fisher, they put an emphasis on recruiting and they finished with some top, real nice classes. Obviously the one in 2022 that highlighted it, the cherry on top. But how do you see that production in terms of moving those top 5, top 7 classes into more wins, or I guess and whatnot, and so how's that going to change here to convince like someone on that?
Sure, it might be hard to convince you, but I'll do my best. So I think in today's day and age in college football, it is very rare to have a program that is consistent and can keep guys long term, because as soon as these 5-star guys can see opportunity elsewhere and NIL deals elsewhere now, they can leave. I think there are 2 or 3 programs that are able to hold on to these guys and build like a winning culture and a culture of togetherness as a program. And that's like Georgia, Alabama, maybe Ohio State. They kind of recruit at that level, but they haven't won anything in recent years. It's really, really hard to do that. And if you look at the championship this year, Michigan and Washington, these are teams that had full buy-in. They had continuity on their rosters year on year. So yes, recruiting has to be good. I would like to recruit at a top 10 level consistently and not have to get 35 kids in the portal. I think that's where you want to be, but I think you have to use the portal as well. You need to be willing to use it. I don't think Jimbo was very willing to use it. And I think that made A&M pay in the cornerback department. That's just something I've been saying on my channel. We wish we would have gotten some more corners in the portal last year. So you fill in the gaps with the portal. You don't have to recruit at that top 3 level that Jimbo was recruiting at. I think Michigan and Washington have proved that. I think you just need to build a team that is bought in, that wants to play together, that wants to play for their staff, that has the right mindset, and they can stay together for several years and build together. And I like some of the players they targeted in the portal. A lot of these guys are upperclassmen with 2 years of eligibility left. That's like a common thread. They're all like 3 or 4 years of experience with 1 or 2 years of eligibility left. And the ones with 2 years of eligibility left with all that experience, that's great because those guys can get into your culture and learn your way, and you'll have a couple years with them, rather than going and targeting guys that have a year left or that might bounce again. I really like that. It's about togetherness. It's about buy-in. It's about building year on year. And I would like to see that a little bit different than how it was before. Like you said, I think, Matt, you mentioned it earlier, that there's just more and more coming out about how behind the scenes, maybe this team wasn't as together or as locked in as we would have hoped or thought. So I think that'll be a priority going forward, while also recruiting really well. But I'm okay if you're not top 3 like Jimbo was a couple times. Does that cover it? I don't know. I've been thinking about this a
No,
lot.
I think that's great. I think you hit it on the nose.